Yo, what are you doing in my house?
Hands where I can see them. You match the description.
Description of what? I live here. You broke my door.
Save it. We got a call. Tall black male, gray shirt, acting suspicious. That's you.
That fits half the city, man.
We'll verify after you're detained.
You're arresting me in my own living room?
Should have thought about that before looking like trouble.
Officer Bradley Kane had been with the Ridgeport Police Department for a little over 14 months. 14 months of borderline evaluations, 14 months of supervisors quietly noting he rushed into situations he barely understood, and 14 months of warnings about his tendency to treat suspicion as evidence. His academy instructors had flagged his aggressive entry reflex and his difficulty distinguishing between lawful presence and criminal intent. Those notes were acknowledged, signed, and ultimately buried because Ridgeport was understaffed, overwhelmed, and desperate to put bodies in uniforms rather than invest time in proper field training. One calm Saturday afternoon, those ignored warnings collided with a man sitting peacefully in his own living room. What should have been a simple check the area call warped into a forced entry, a wrongful arrest, and a career-ending mistake captured entirely on Axon body camera. A mistake that would cost the city millions and expose a department that repeatedly failed to correct the very behavior that caused it. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. Ridgeport, a suburban city of about 85,000 in the Pacific Northwest, known for tree-lined streets, modest single-family homes, and the kind of neighborhoods where people still wave to their neighbors. The kind of place where serious crime is rare enough that when dispatch gets a call about something suspicious, officers respond with a level of attention that might seem disproportionate in bigger cities. It was 2:17 p.m. on a Saturday in mid-June. The weather was perfect, the temperature in the mid-70s, windows open and houses up and down Maple Ridge Drive, kids playing basketball in driveways, the smell of someone's barbecue drifting on the breeze. Normal, suburban Saturday afternoon activity. The dispatch call came in at 2:09 p.m. An elderly woman, Mrs. Eleanor Patterson, had called to report seeing a tall black man in a gray shirt walking near her neighbor's property. She said he looked like he was checking things out, and that she'd never seen him before. She couldn't say he'd done anything illegal, couldn't say he'd tried any doors or windows, just said he looked suspicious and was walking slowly near houses. The dispatcher logged the call as suspicious person and sent it to the officer patrolling that sector. Officer Bradley Kane, who'd been driving his route looking for something to do during a slow shift, responded immediately. Kane was 26 years old, 14 months into his law enforcement career, and still operating with the mindset that every call was an opportunity to catch someone doing something wrong. His training officers had noted this tendency repeatedly. One had written in his evaluation, "Officer Kane demonstrates enthusiasm but lacks patience in assessment. He tends to move toward confrontation before gathering sufficient information." Another had noted, "Concerns about Officer Kane's ability to distinguish between unusual behavior and criminal behavior. Recommends additional field training before solo patrol authorization." But Ridgeport PD was struggling with staffing. 3 officers had retired in the past year. 2 had left for better-paying departments. The city council had approved new hiring, but the academy pipeline was slow. So supervisors were clearing rookies for solo patrol faster than they should have, with less field training than policy technically required, because empty patrol cars didn't prevent crime, and the community was demanding police presence. Kane had been cleared for solo duty after just 10 weeks of field training, 2 weeks short of the department's stated standard. His supervising sergeant had signed off with reservations, but under pressure from command staff to get bodies on the street. When Kane received the call about a suspicious person on Maple Ridge Drive, his radio response was immediate. "Copy. En route. ETA 2 minutes." He'd driven that route before. Maple Ridge Drive was a quiet street with houses built in the 1970s, well-maintained, middle-class neighborhood, mostly white residents with a few Asian and Latino families mixed in.
Kane had never noticed any black residents on that street during his patrols, which in his mind made the call more credible. A black man walking where black people didn't usually walk registered in his pattern recognition system as worth investigating.
Kane pulled onto Maple Ridge Drive at 2:12 p.m., his patrol car rolling slowly as he scanned house numbers and looked for anyone matching the vague description. Tall, black male, gray shirt. That was all he had to work with. He drove past 847 Maple Ridge Drive, a single-story ranch house with beige siding and a small front porch. He didn't see anyone outside. He drove to the end of the block, turned around, came back slowly. Still no one visible. At 2:14 p.m., Kane parked his patrol car 3 houses down from 847 and got out, his Axon Bodycam activated automatically, the small lens on his chest beginning to record everything from his perspective. The footage would later become the primary evidence in multiple investigations. Kane walked toward 847 Maple Ridge Drive with purpose, his hand resting on his duty belt near his service weapon, his posture that of someone expecting confrontation. He stepped onto the small front porch and looked through the window beside the door. He could see movement inside. Someone was home. This is where a protocol required Kane to do several things. First, verify the address matched the location from the call. Second, observe for signs of criminal activity before taking action. Third, make contact appropriately by knocking and identifying himself as police. Fourth, gather information before making assumptions. Kane did none of these things. Instead, he tried the front door handle. It was unlocked, and without knocking, without announcing himself, without verifying he was even at the right house, Officer Bradley Kane pushed the door open and stepped inside. The body cam footage shows exactly what happened next. The camera angle is from Kane's chest level, capturing his perspective as he entered. Bright afternoon sunlight streaming through windows. A modest living room with a couch, coffee table, TV on the wall playing a basketball game, and a black man in his early 30s sitting on the couch, wearing a gray t-shirt and jeans, holding a sandwich, frozen in surprise at the sudden intrusion. The man's name was Marcus Williams. He was 33 years old, an IT project manager for a software company downtown. He'd been living at 847 Maple Ridge Drive for 2 years, ever since accepting the job and relocating from California. He'd been working from home that week, taking advantage of the nice weather by keeping his windows open. He'd made himself lunch and settled onto his couch to eat while watching the game. A completely normal Saturday afternoon in his own home. And then, a police officer burst through his front door. Marcus jumped to his feet, the sandwich falling from his hand onto the coffee table. "Yo, what are you doing in my house?" Kane's hand moved to his weapon, though he didn't draw it. "Hands where I can see them. You match the description." Marcus raised his hands, confusion and anger flooding his face. "Description of what? I live here. You just broke into my house." "Save it," Kane said, his tone dismissive and authoritative. "We got a call. Tall black male, gray shirt, acting suspicious near properties. That's you." Marcus stared at him in disbelief. "That fits half the city, man. You broke into my house based on that?" Kane didn't respond to the question. He was scanning the room now, looking for evidence of criminal activity, for stolen property, for anything that would justify his entry. But the room was ordinary, clean, lived in. Mail stacked on the coffee table, laptop open on the side table, keys hanging by the door, photos on the wall of Marcus with family members. Everything about the space screamed, someone lives here legitimately. But Kane wasn't processing those details. He was focused on the fact that he'd received a call about a suspicious black man. He'd found a black man, and in his mind, that meant he'd done his job correctly.
"I need to see some ID," Kane said, stepping further into the living room. "ID?" Marcus's voice rose with incredulity. "You need to get out of my house. You didn't knock. You didn't announce yourself. You just walked in like you own the place." "Sir, calm down. I'm investigating a call. If you live here, showing me ID will clear this up quickly." Marcus took a step back, his hands still raised. "I'm not showing you anything until you tell me why you're in my house without a warrant, without permission, without even knocking." This is where training should have kicked in, where an experienced officer would have recognized the mistake, de-escalated, apologized, and left. Where someone with better judgment would have looked at the mail on the table, the photos on the wall, the laptop with a work login screen visible, and realized this was clearly someone's home, and they were clearly that someone. But Kane was 14 months into his career, with minimal field training and an ego that wouldn't allow him to admit error. Instead of de-escalating, he escalated. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," Kane ordered, reaching for his handcuffs. Marcus's eyes went wide. "You arrested me? In my own living room? Should have thought about that before looking like trouble." That line, captured clearly on the Bodycam audio, would later be played in depositions, in news broadcasts, in training sessions, as an example of exactly what not to say. It revealed everything about Kane's mindset. He decided Marcus was trouble based solely on appearance, and nothing Marcus said or did would change that assumption. Marcus pulled his arm back instinctively, a natural human response to unwanted physical contact. Kane interpreted it as resistance. "Don't resist!" Kane shouted, using the pulling away as justification to grab Marcus more forcefully, spinning him around and forcing his hands behind his back. The handcuffs clicked into place. Marcus Williams, a man who'd been eating lunch in his own living room, was now in handcuffs in his own home, arrested by an officer who'd illegally entered without cause. The neighbor's voice. Just as Kane was securing the handcuffs, a woman's voice came from the open front door. "Officer, what's going on?" Kane turned to see an elderly white woman standing on the porch, concern on her face. This was Helen Martinez, Marcus's next-door neighbor, who'd become friendly with him over the 2 years he lived there. She'd noticed the patrol car, had seen the officer enter the house, and had walked over to see what was happening. "Ma'am, step back, please. Police business," Kane said, his tone leaving no room for argument. But Helen didn't step back. "That's Marcus. He lives here. I see him every day. What's this about?" Kane's jaw tightened. The neighbor's testimony was creating doubt, making him question his actions, but his pride wouldn't let him back down now. "Ma'am, I appreciate your input, but I'm conducting an investigation. Please return to your home." Helen looked at Marcus, at the handcuffs, at the officer who clearly didn't want to admit a mistake. "Marcus, are you okay? Do you need me to call anyone?" "Call my lawyer. Tell him a cop broke into my house and arrested me for sitting on my couch." Within 3 minutes, 2 more patrol cars arrived. Officer Kane had called for backup using his radio, a standard procedure when making an arrest. But what should have been support for a legitimate apprehension instead became witnesses to a catastrophic mistake. Officer Jennifer Park and Michael Torres entered the house and immediately sensed something was wrong. They'd been on the force for 8 and 6 years respectively, had responded to countless calls, and had developed the instincts Kane lacked. They looked at the scene. A man in handcuffs standing in the living room that clearly shows signs of occupancy. Mail on the table. Personal photos on the walls. No signs of forced entry except for the door that Kane himself had pushed open. No stolen property. No evidence of any crime whatsoever. Torres spoke first. "Kane, what do we have here?" Kane's voice had a defensive edge now. "Suspicious person call. Subject massive description. Found him inside this residence." Park walked over to the coffee table and picked up an envelope from the stack of mail. Bills addressed to Marcus Williams at this address. She looked at the photos on the wall. "That's him in these photos, with family, in front of this house." She turned to Marcus. "Sir, is this your residence?" "Yes," Marcus said through clenched teeth. "I've been trying to tell him that since he burst through my front door without knocking." Torres's expression shifted to alarm. "You entered without announcing." Kane's face flushed. "The door was unlocked. The call says suspicious person near properties. He matched the description." "What description?" Park asked. "What exactly did dispatch tell you?" "Tall black male, gray shirt near properties on Maple Ridge Drive." Park and Torres exchanged a look. Years of experience told them immediately what had happened. Torres pulled out his radio and called dispatch. "Dispatch, show me the exact address from that suspicious person call on Maple Ridge." Dispatch responded, 857 Maple Ridge Drive. Caller reported seeing someone walk past her house toward her neighbor's property at 8:59. Torres closed his eyes briefly, the weight of the mistake settling over him. He looked at Kane. "This is 847 Maple Ridge Drive. You went into the wrong house." The body cam footage captured the moment perfectly. Kane's face going pale, his mouth opening and closing without words. The realization that he'd forced entry into a residence based on a vague description, without verifying the address,
without establishing probable cause, without following any of the procedures that exist specifically to prevent this kind of violation. Park walked over to Marcus. Sir, I'm deeply sorry. This was a mistake. We're going to remove those handcuffs immediately. As she unlocked the cuffs, Torres was checking the address numbers on his phone, confirming what dispatch had said. He turned to Kane with barely controlled anger. You didn't verify the address? You just picked the house and entered? Kane's voice was barely a whisper. I saw him through the window. He matched a description that to fit thousands of people. Park interrupted. Tall black male in a gray shirt isn't probable cause for anything, let alone entering someone's home. Marcus rubbed his wrist where the handcuffs had been. He was shaking, not with fear, but with rage. He looked at Kane with an expression that combined fury and something close to pity. You didn't just make a mistake. You busted into my house. You put me in handcuffs in front of my neighbors, and you treated me like a criminal in my own living room. Kane didn't respond, couldn't respond, because every word Marcus said was true and captured on video. Park pulled out a card and handed it to Marcus. Sir, this is the number for our Internal Affairs Division. I strongly encourage you to file a complaint. This is not acceptable conduct. Torres added, we'll make sure this is documented and reported to our supervisors. Again, I apologize on behalf of the department. The two officers escorted Kane out of the house, leaving Marcus standing in his living room, his lunch scattered on the floor, his front door hanging open, and his sense of security in his own home shattered. Before we continue, if you think rookie officers need longer field training before solo patrol, drop a comment below. Within 3 minutes, 2 more patrol cars arrived. Officer Kane had called for backup using his radio, a standard procedure when making an arrest. But what should have been support for a legitimate apprehension instead became witnesses to a catastrophic mistake. Officer Jennifer Park and Michael Torres entered the house and immediately sensed something was wrong. They'd been on the force for 8 and 6 years respectively, had responded to countless calls, and had developed the instincts Kane lacked. They looked at the scene. A man in handcuffs standing in a living room that clearly shows signs of occupancy. Mail on the table. Personal photos on the walls. No signs of forced entry except for the door that Kane himself had pushed open. No stolen property. No evidence of any crime whatsoever. Torres spoke first. Kane, what do we have here? Kane's voice had a defensive edge now. Suspicious person call. Subject massive description. Found him inside this residence. Park walked over to the coffee table and picked up an envelope from the stack of mail. Bills addressed to Marcus Williams at this address. She looked at the photos on the wall. That's him in these photos, with family, in front of this house. She turned to Marcus. Sir, is this your residence? Yes, Marcus said through clenched teeth. I've been trying to tell him that since he burst through my front door without knocking. Torres's expression shifted to alarm. You entered without announcing. Kane's face flushed. The door was unlocked. The call says suspicious person near properties. He matched the description. What description? Park asked. What exactly did dispatch tell you? Tall black male, gray shirt near properties on Maple Ridge Drive. Park and Torres exchanged a look. Years of experience told them immediately what had happened. Torres pulled out his radio and called dispatch. Dispatch, show me the exact address from that suspicious person call on Maple Ridge. Dispatch responded, 857 Maple Ridge Drive. Caller reported seeing someone walk past her house toward her neighbor's property at 8:59. Torres closed his eyes briefly, the weight of the mistake settling over him. He looked at Kane. This is 847 Maple Ridge Drive. You went into the wrong house. The Bodycam footage captured the moment perfectly. Kane's face going pale, his mouth opening and closing without words. The realization that he'd forced entry into a residence based on a vague description, without verifying the address, without establishing probable cause, without following any of the procedures that exist specifically to prevent this kind of violation. Park walked over to Marcus. Sir, I'm deeply sorry. This was a mistake. We're going to remove those handcuffs immediately. As she unlocked the cuffs, Torres was checking the address numbers on his phone, confirming what dispatch had said. He turned to Kane with barely controlled anger. You didn't verify the address? You just picked the house and entered? Kane's voice was barely a whisper. I saw him through the window. He matched a description that to fit thousands of people. Park interrupted. Tall black male in a gray shirt isn't probable cause for anything, let alone entering someone's home. Marcus rubbed his wrist where the handcuffs had been. He was shaking, not with fear, but with rage. He looked at Kane with an expression that combined fury and something close to pity. You didn't just make a mistake. You busted into my house. You put me in handcuffs in front of my neighbors, and you treated me like a criminal in my own living room. Kane didn't respond. Couldn't respond. Because every word Marcus said was true and captured on video. Park pulled out a card and handed it to Marcus. Sir, this is the number for our Internal Affairs Division. I strongly encourage you to file a complaint. This is not acceptable conduct. Torres added, we'll make sure this is documented and reported to our supervisors. Again, I apologize on behalf of the department. The two officers escorted Kane out of the house, leaving Marcus standing in his living room, his lunch scattered on the floor, his front door hanging open, and his sense of security in his own home shattered. Before we continue, if you think rookie officers need longer field training before solo patrol, drop a comment below.
By Monday morning, the incident had reached the desk of Captain James Rodriguez, head of internal affairs for Ridgeport PD. He'd been forwarded 3 things: Officer Kane's incident report, the body cam footage from all 3 officers at the scene, and a formal complaint filed by Marcus Wishiams through his attorney. Rodriguez had been with the department for 21 years. He'd investigated countless misconduct allegations, from minor policy violations to serious civil rights abuses. But as he watched the body cam footage from Kane's entry into Marcus Williams' home, he felt a familiar combination of anger and resignation. Anger at the blatant violation of procedure. Resignation because he'd seen this pattern before. He pulled Kane's personnel file and spread the documents across his desk. The academy evaluations that flagged aggressive entry reflex. The field training reports noting concerns about distinguishing lawful presence from criminal intent. The supervisor memos recommending additional training before solo patrol authorization. And most damning, the sign-off sheet clearing Kane for solo duty despite not completing the full field training period. Rodriguez picked up his phone and called the training division supervisor. We need to talk about Officer Kane. How did he get cleared for solo patrol with these red flags in his file? The response was what Rodriguez expected. Staffing shortages, pressure from command to get officers on the street, judgment call by the supervising sergeant who signed off on him. Rodriguez hung up and continued reviewing the footage. He watched it 3 times, taking notes on specific violations. Minute 2:14. Officer approaches residence without verifying address matches dispatch call location. Policy violation. Officers must confirm address before initiating contact. Minute 2:15. Officer enters unlocked door without knocking, announcing, or establishing probable cause. Legal violation. Fourth Amendment protection against unreasonable search and seizure. Minute 2:16. Officer detains homeowner based solely on vague physical description. Policy violation. Reasonable suspicion requires specific, articulable facts beyond general appearance. Minute 2:17. Officer places homeowner under arrest without establishing any criminal activity. Legal violation. False arrest. Minute 2:18. Officer makes statement suggesting arrest based on appearance. Should have thought about that before looking like trouble. Evidence of potential bias. The list went on. Rodriguez counted 12 separate policy violations and at least 4 potential legal violations within the span of 6 minutes, and all of it captured on video with perfect clarity. He drafted his preliminary findings and scheduled a formal interview with Officer Kane for the following day. The interview room in the Internal Affairs Division was small, windowless, painted in neutral beige. Officer King sat across from Captain Rodriguez and Lieutenant Sarah Chen, the department's civil rights compliance officer. A digital recorder sat on the table between them, a red light indicating it was capturing every word. Rodriguez started with a direct question. Officer Kane, walk me through your decision-making process when you received the suspicious person call on Saturday. Kane's voice was nervous, defensive. Dispatch said there was a tall black male in a gray shirt acting suspicious on Maple Ridge Drive. I responded to the call, saw someone matching that description inside a residence, and made contact. Made contact, Rodriguez repeated. Is that how you describe entering someone's home without permission?
That doesn't give you legal authority to enter without probable cause, exigent circumstances, or a warrant. What made you believe you had the right to enter that residence?
Kane hesitated. I saw him through the window. He matched the description from the call. Chen leaned forward. Did you verify the address before entering? I was on Maple Ridge Drive.
That's where dispatch said to go. Dispatch gave you a specific address, 857 Maple Ridge Drive. You entered 847. That's 3 houses away. Did you check the house number before entering? Kane's face flushed. I saw someone who matched the description. I thought, you thought wrong, Rodriguez interrupted. But let's continue. When you entered, what evidence of criminal activity did you observe? He was inside the residence. Being inside a residence isn't a crime. What evidence suggested he didn't belong there? Kane fumbled for words. The call said suspicious person near properties. I found him inside a property. Did you see any signs of forced entry, broken windows, damaged locks, stolen property visible? No, but did Mr. Williams threaten you, make any aggressive movements, give you reason to fear for your safety? He was standing up when I entered. Standing up in one's own living room, Chen said, her tone laced with barely controlled frustration. Did it occur to you that you might be in the wrong house? That the mail on the table, the photos on the walls, the personal belongings everywhere might indicate someone actually lived there? Kane didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched out, damning in its implication. Rodriguez pulled out a transcript of the Bodycam audio. I want to read you something you said while arresting Mr. Williams. You told him he should have thought about that before looking like trouble. What did you mean by that? Kane's hands clenched on the table. I just meant he matched the description. If he hadn't matched a description of a tall black male in a gray shirt, do you understand how many people fit that description? Do you understand that physical appearance alone, without any criminal behavior, cannot be the basis for detention or arrest? But the call said, the call was about someone near 857 Maple Ridge Drive. You entered 847. That's 3 houses away. Did you check the house number before entering? The interview continued for another 40 minutes. Kane tried to defend his actions, to argue that he had been responding to a call and making split-second decisions. But every defense crumbled under scrutiny. The Bodycam footage contradicted his claims about feeling threatened. The address mismatch proved he hadn't done basic verification. His own words on tape revealed bias. By the end of the interview, Kane's attorney was advising him to stop talking. Rodriguez concluded this session with a direct statement. Officer Kane, I'm recommending your immediate suspension pending completion of this investigation. You violated policy, violated civil rights, and demonstrated judgment failures that make you unsuitable for patrol duties. You'll receive written notice by end of business today.
Marcus Williams' attorney, David Chen, from the Pacific Civil Rights Foundation, held a press conference 4 days after the incident. The footage hadn't been released publicly yet, but word of what happened had spread through Ridgeport's community networks, especially within the black community, where stories of police misconduct were shared as warnings and validated experiences. Chen stood at a podium outside the courthouse, Marcus beside him. Cameras from 3 local news stations focused on them. On Saturday afternoon, my client was eating lunch in his own home when Officer Bradley Kane of the Ridgeport Police Department forced entry without warrant, without cause, and without even verifying he was at the correct address. Mr. Williams was handcuffed and detained in his own living room, based on nothing more than his physical appearance and an officer's assumption that a black man couldn't possibly belong in that neighborhood. He paused, letting the statement sink in. The Bodycam footage which we've obtained through public records request shows the entire incident. It shows Officer Kane entering without announcement. It shows Mr. Williams identifying himself as the homeowner. It shows the officer refusing to verify that claim before making an arrest. And it shows the officer making a statement that reveals his biased assumptions. Should have thought about that before looking like trouble. He clicked the remote, and a screen behind him showed still images from the Bodycam footage. Marcus sitting on his couch before the entry, the male with his name visible on the coffee table, the photos on the wall, the moment of arrest in his own home. This isn't just about one bad officer.
This is about a system that cleared Officer Kane for solo patrol despite documented concerns about his judgment. A system that prioritized filling shifts over proper training. A system that allowed an officer with clear warning signs to patrol alone and violate citizens' constitutional rights. Marcus stepped to the microphone. He had prepared a brief statement, though his voice carried weight beyond the words. I've lived in Ridgeport for 2 years. I pay my taxes, I contribute to this community, and I had my home invaded by someone who saw my skin color and decided I didn't belong in my own living room. That officer didn't see a homeowner. He saw a threat, and that assumption cost me my sense of safety in the one place where everyone deserves to feel secure. He looked directly at the cameras. I'm not just a victim. I'm a voice for everyone who's been profiled, everyone who's been assumed guilty, everyone who's had to prove they belong in spaces they've earned the right to occupy. Officer Kane's career might end over this, but the real question is whether the system that created him will change. The news coverage that evening was extensive. All 3 local stations led with the story. By the next morning, it had been picked up by regional outlets. By that afternoon, national civil rights organizations were issuing statements. The Bodycam footage, released through public records request, went viral online. The Ridgeport Police Department issued a brief statement. We are aware of the incident involving Officer Kane and have initiated a thorough internal investigation. We take all allegations of misconduct seriously and are committed to accountability. The statement satisfied no one.
Kane pulled onto Maple Ridge Drive at 2:12 p.m., his patrol car rolling slowly as he scanned house numbers and looked for anyone matching the vague description. Tall, black male, gray shirt. That was all he had to work with. He drove past 847 Maple Ridge Drive, a single-story ranch house with beige siding and a small front porch. He didn't see anyone outside. He drove to the end of the block, turned around, came back slowly. Still no one visible. At 2:14 p.m., Kane parked his patrol car 3 houses down from 847 and got out. His Axon Bodycam activated automatically, the small lens on his chest beginning to record everything from his perspective. The footage would later become the primary evidence in multiple investigations. Kane walked toward 847 Maple Ridge Drive with purpose, his hand resting on his duty belt near his service weapon, his posture that of someone expecting confrontation. He stepped onto the small front porch and looked through the window beside the door. He could see movement inside. Someone was home. This is where a protocol required Kane to do several things. First, verify the address matched the location from the call. Second, observe for signs of criminal activity before taking action. Third, make contact appropriately by knocking and identifying himself as police. Fourth, gather information before making assumptions. Kane did none of these things. Instead, he tried the front door handle. It was unlocked, and without knocking, without announcing himself, without verifying he was even at the right house, Officer Bradley Kane pushed the door open and stepped inside. The body cam footage shows exactly what happened next. The camera angle is from Kane's chest level, capturing his perspective as he entered. Bright afternoon sunlight streaming through windows. A modest living room with a couch, coffee table, TV on the wall playing a basketball game, and a black man in his early 30s sitting on the couch, wearing a gray t-shirt and jeans, holding a sandwich, frozen in surprise at the sudden intrusion. The man's name was Marcus Williams. He was 33 years old, an IT project manager for a software company downtown. He'd been living at 847 Maple Ridge Drive for 2 years, ever since accepting the job and relocating from California. He'd been working from home that week, taking advantage of the nice weather by keeping his windows open. He'd made himself lunch and settled onto his couch to eat while watching the game. A completely normal Saturday afternoon in his own home. And then, a police officer burst through his front door. Marcus jumped to his feet, the sandwich falling from his hand onto the coffee table. "Yo, what are you doing in my house?" Kane's hand moved to his weapon, though he didn't draw it. "Hands where I can see them. You match the description." Marcus raised his hands, confusion and anger flooding his face. "Description of what? I live here. You just broke into my house." "Save it," Kane said, his tone dismissive and authoritative. "We got a call.
Tall black male, gray shirt, acting suspicious near properties. That's you. Marcus stared at him in disbelief. That fits half the city, man. You broke into my house based on that? Kane didn't respond to the question. He was scanning the room now, looking for evidence of criminal activity, for stolen property, for anything that would justify his entry. But the room was ordinary, clean, lived in. Mail stacked on the coffee table, laptop open on the side table, keys hanging by the door, photos on the wall of Marcus with family members. Everything about the space screamed, someone lives here legitimately. But Kane wasn't processing those details. He was focused on the fact that he'd received a call about a suspicious black man. He'd found a black man, and in his mind, that meant he'd done his job correctly.
Hey man, why are you heading into that building?
Just going inside. What's the problem?
I've been circling this block. You've been hanging around a while. Looks like you're trying to slip in where you don't belong.
I'm not hanging around, sir.
Yeah? Well, something feels off. Let me see your ID.
I don't have to give you anything without a real reason.
All right, you're being detained.
Well, you're getting sued because I own this building.
Officer Daniel R. Moore had been with the Midtown City Police Department for just under a year. 11 months of patrols, 11 months of write-ups, and 11 months of supervisors quietly noting that his instincts often fired long before his judgment did. His academy scores were passable, not impressive, with evaluators repeatedly flagging his habit of assuming guilt based on presence rather than behavior. Those warnings were filed, acknowledged, and ultimately ignored because the department was understaffed, under pressure, and unable to turn away recruits who met the minimum standard on paper. On a calm Thursday afternoon, those unchecked instincts met a man unlocking the front door of his own building. What should have been an uneventful moment outside a quiet apartment entrance instead became the spark that would end Moore's career, cost the department $750,000, and expose how a single officer's assumptions can ignite a disaster in less than 30 seconds.
Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light.
Midtown City, a mid-sized urban center in the Northeast with tree-lined streets, renovated brownstones, and a diverse population of young professionals, families, and longtime residents. Derek Lawson, 34 years old, was walking toward his apartment building at 437 Riverside Avenue. He'd lived there for 3 years, ever since accepting a position as a civil rights attorney with the Department of Justice's Community Relations Division. His work focused on investigating police misconduct cases, reviewing federal civil rights violations, and ensuring law enforcement agencies complied with constitutional standards. Derek had spent the day reviewing depositions for an upcoming case. Long hours in a windowless conference room, reading testimony, taking notes, preparing arguments. He was tired, mentally drained, ready to get home, change clothes, and decompress. He wore business casual attire, gray slacks, a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, leather dress shoes. His messenger bag hung across his shoulder, filled with case files in his laptop. His keys were already in his hand as he approached the building entrance. The apartment building was a 3-story structure with 12 units, modest but well-maintained. Red brick exterior, black iron railings, a single entrance with a heavy wooden door that required a key to unlock. Derek had walked through that door hundreds of times over 3 years. His name was on the buzzer directory. His mail was delivered to Unit 2B. His rent checks cleared every month without issue. This was his home, legally, practically, undeniably. He inserted his key into the lock and turned it. The mechanism clicked. The door began to open. And that's when Officer Daniel Moore's voice cut through the quiet afternoon air. "Hey man, why are you heading into that building?" Derek paused mid-motion. The door opened just a few inches. He turned and saw a uniformed police officer standing about 10 feet away on the sidewalk, one hand resting on his duty belt, the other gesturing vaguely toward the entrance. Officer Moore was in his late 20s, clean-cut, with the rigid posture of someone trying to project authority they didn't yet naturally possess. His Axon Bodycam was recording, a small lens mounted on his chest, capturing everything from his perspective. Derek's initial reaction was confusion. "Just going inside. What's the problem?" Moore took a step closer, his eyes scanning Derek from head to toe. "I've been circling this block. You've been hanging around." "No," Derek replied, his tone calm but firm. This was a lie, a convenient fiction that Moore would later claim justified his suspicion. The truth, visible on the Bodycam footage's timestamp, was that Derek had been on the block for approximately 45 seconds, the time it took him to walk from where he'd parked his car half a block away to his building entrance. There was no loitering, no suspicious behavior, no activity that could reasonably be described as hanging around. But Moore had seen a black man approaching a building in a neighborhood that was becoming wealthier and whiter, and his brain had filled in a narrative that didn't exist. Moore's training at the academy had included modules on implicit bias, on recognizing how assumptions can cloud judgment, on the importance of gathering facts before acting. But training is one thing. Real-world application under the pressure of patrol, especially for a rookie still forming his instincts, is something else entirely. And Moore's instincts had been shaped not just by 11 months on the job, but by a lifetime of absorbent cultural messages about who belongs where, who looks suspicious, and who deserves scrutiny.
"I need to ask you some questions," Moore said, his hand now moving to rest on his radio. "Can you step away from the door?" Derek felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the mixture of anger and caution that comes from being black in America and knowing that these encounters can escalate quickly, regardless of who's right. But he also knew his rights. He knew police procedure. He knew what officers were legally allowed to do and what they weren't. "Officer, I live here," Derek said, keeping his voice level. "I was unlocking my door. Is there a specific reason you're stopping me?" Moore's jaw tightened. He didn't like being questioned, didn't like the challenge to his authority, didn't like that this man wasn't immediately complying. "I'm investigating suspicious activity in the area. I need you to cooperate." "What suspicious activity?" Derek asked. "What did I do that made you stop me?" Moore didn't answer directly, because there was no answer. There had been no suspicious activity. No call for service, no report of a crime, no description of a suspect. Moore had simply been driving his patrol route, had seen a black man approaching a building, and had decided that warranted investigation. His training told him he needed reasonable suspicion to detain someone. His instincts told him that a black man near a building was inherently suspicious. The conflict between those two things should have made him pause, reconsider, disengage. Instead, it made him double down. "Let me see your ID," Moore said, his tone shifting from questioning to commanding. Derek shook his head slightly. "You don't have a reason to ask for my ID. I haven't committed any crime. I'm standing at my own front door." Under the Fourth Amendment, police officers must have reasonable suspicion that a person has committed, is committing, or is about to commit a crime before they can legally detain that person and demand identification. Reasonable suspicion requires specific, articulable facts, not just a hunch or a feeling. The standard exists precisely to prevent arbitrary stops based on nothing more than an officer's assumptions about who looks out of place. Moore knew this, theoretically. He'd learned it at the academy. But in the moment, with his authority being challenged, with the man refusing to immediately comply, his knowledge of constitutional law was overridden by his ego and his unchecked biases. "All right, stand still," Moore said, stepping closer. "I'm not joking. You're being detained." "For what?" Derek's voice rose slightly, not in aggression but in disbelief. "I'm entering my own apartment." Moore raised his free hand defensively, palm out, as if Derek had made a threatening movement, even though Derek hadn't moved at all. "Sir, you need to calm down. You're making this harder than it needs to be." This is a common deflection tactic. When an officer lacks legal justification for his actions, they shift the focus to the citizen's demeanor, suggesting that compliance would resolve the situation, implying that resistance or questioning is the real problem. It places the burden of de-escalation on the person being wrongly detained, rather than on the officer who initiated the unlawful encounter.
A woman walking her dog on the opposite sidewalk slowed down, sensing the tension. She pulled out her phone, not yet recording, but ready. A teenager on a bike stopped at the corner, watching. These were the first witnesses, the first people who would later provide accounts that contradicted Moore's version of events. Derek could feel the situation slipping towards something worse. He knew how these encounters could end. He'd reviewed case files where routine stops became violent arrests, where black men who did nothing wrong ended up injured, charged, or worse. He also knew that he had rights, that giving in to an unlawful detention reinforced a system that needed to be challenged, not accommodated. "Officer," Derek said, forcing his voice to remain steady, "I'm a federal civil rights attorney with the Department of Justice. I know my rights. You do not have reasonable suspicion to detain me. I'm asking you to step aside and let me enter my home." Moore blinked. The mention of federal attorney registered, but not in the way it should have. Instead of making him reconsider, it seemed to make him more defensive, as if Derek's credentials were a challenge rather than a clarification. "I don't care what you do for work. Right now, you're being detained as part of an investigation." "What investigation?" Derek asked again. "What crime are you investigating? What specific facts gave you reasonable suspicion to stop me?" Moore's Bodycam audio picked up his breathing, faster now, shallow. His hand tightened on his radio. He glanced around, noticing the woman with the phone, the teenager watching. He was starting to realize he was in a situation he didn't know how to exit without looking wrong. But instead of de-escalating, instead of acknowledging the lack of legal basis for the stop, he escalated. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," Moore ordered. Derek took a step back, closer to the door he'd been trying to enter. "No, you have no legal authority to arrest me. I'm not turning around. I'm not putting my hands behind my back. I'm going into my home." Moore moved quickly and grabbed Derek's arm, not aggressively but firmly, his hand wrapping around Derek's bicep in an attempt to control his movement. "Stop resisting. Don't touch me. I live here." Derek pulled his arm back, not striking, not fighting, just removing himself from the officer's grasp. It was a reflex, a natural human response to unwanted physical contact, but Moore would later characterize it as resistance, as justification for escalation. The woman across the street raised her phone and started recording. The teenager did the same. Within seconds, there were multiple cameras capturing what happened next, creating a record that would prove essential. Moore grabbed Derek's arm again, this time with both hands, trying to turn him around. Derek braced himself against the doorframe, refusing to be spun around, refusing to be put in handcuffs for the crime of entering his own building. "You're making this worse," Moore shouted, his voice strained with effort and frustration. "I'm not making anything worse," Derek shouted back. "You're violating my rights." A second passerby, an older white man in a business suit, stopped and called out, "Officer, what's going on? What did he do?" Moore ignored him. His focus was entirely on Derek now, on maintaining control, on proving his authority. He reached for his handcuffs with one hand while trying to hold Derek's arm with the other. "Sir, if you don't comply, I will charge you with resisting arrest." "Resisting arrest for what?" Derek's voice was loud now, carrying down the block. "What am I being arrested for?"
This is the circular logic of unlawful detention. An officer stops someone without legal justification. The person questions the stop or refuses to comply. The officer escalates to arrest. The person resists the unlawful arrest. The officer then uses that resistance as justification for the arrest, ignoring that the initial detention was illegal. It's a trap designed to criminalize the act of asserting one's rights. More people were stopping now. A small crowd was forming, phones out, recording from multiple angles. Someone called out, "He said he lives there. Why are you grabbing him?" Moore's body cam captured his own heavy breathing, the shakiness in his voice when he spoke into his radio. "I need backup at 437 Riverside. I have an individual resisting detention." Derek made a decision. He stopped pulling away, stopped bracing against the doorframe. He stood still, hands at his sides, and spoke clearly and loudly so every camera could hear. "I am not resisting. I am standing still. I am not threatening you. I live in this building. My name is Derek Lawson. I live in Unit 2B. You are violating my Fourth Amendment rights." Moore hesitated, his hand still gripping Derek's arm. The sudden compliance threw him off. He'd been prepared for continued resistance, for a justification to escalate further. But Derek's calm, clear statement of his rights, spoken loudly for the witnesses and cameras, left Moore in an awkward position. "Let me see your ID," Moore repeated, but his voice had lost some of its commanding edge. Derek looked directly at the body cam on Moore's chest. "I will show you identification, but I want it on record that I am complying under protest. This stop is unlawful. I have committed no crime, and you will be held accountable." He reached slowly, carefully into his pocket. Moore's hand moved toward his service weapon, a reactionary movement that several witnesses would later describe as excessive, given that Derek's movements were clearly non-threatening. Derek pulled out his wallet and removed 2 items. The first was his driver's license, which listed his address as 437 Riverside Avenue, Unit 2B. The second was a gold-embossed credential in a leather case. United States Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division, Attorney Derek Lawson. He held both items up for Moore to see and for every camera recording to capture. "Here's my driver's license showing I live at this address. And here's my federal credential identifying me as a Department of Justice Civil Rights Attorney. You just unlawfully detained a federal attorney in front of his own home." Moore's face went through a visible transformation. First confusion as he processed what he was seeing, then realization as he understood the magnitude of his mistake, then panic as he calculated the consequences. His hand released Derek's arm. He stepped back. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. You're a federal attorney." His voice was barely above a whisper, but the body cam caught it clearly. "And you just violated my constitutional rights," Derek said, his voice steady but filled with controlled anger. "You detained me without reasonable suspicion. You demanded identification without legal cause. You grabbed me, physically restrained me, threatened me with arrest, all because you saw a black man unlocking the door to his own home and couldn't imagine he might actually belong here." The crowd of witnesses had grown. Someone counted 14 people with phones out, recording from various angles. The woman who'd first pulled out her phone spoke up. "I saw the whole thing. He was just trying to go inside. The officer stopped him for no reason." The teenager added, "He kept saying he lives there. Why didn't you just check?" Moore looked around at the crowd, at the cameras, at Derek standing calmly with his credentials in hand. He looked at the door with Derek's keys still in the lock. He looked at his own body cam, the little red light indicating it had recorded everything. And in that moment, Officer Dandel Moore realized his career was over.
By 7 p.m. that evening, multiple videos from the encounter were circulating on social media. The woman with the dog had posted her footage to Twitter with the caption, "Cop just stopped a black man from entering his own building in Midtown. Watch until the end when he shows he's a federal attorney. This is what profiling looks like." The video had been viewed 50,000 times within the first hour. By midnight, it was over 2 million. By the next morning, it was being covered by local news stations. By the afternoon, it was national news. The Axon Bodycam footage, released 3 days later under public records requests, provided the complete picture. It showed Moore approaching without any visible cause. It captured every word of the exchange. It documented Moore's escalating aggression. It recorded the moment Derek revealed his credentials and Moore's panicked reaction. It was damning, comprehensive, and impossible to explain away. The headlines wrote themselves. Federal civil rights attorney unlawfully detained outside his own home. Rookie cop blocks DOJ attorney from entering his building, career ends in disgrace. Video shows officer racially profiling federal attorney in Midtown incident. Midtown City's black community responded immediately. Within 48 hours, a coalition of civil rights organizations, community leaders, and activist groups had organized a press conference on the steps of City Hall. They demanded Moore's immediate termination, a full investigation into the department's training practices, and policy reforms to prevent similar incidents. The police union issued a statement defending Moore's actions as consistent with officer safety protocols and urging the public to wait for the full investigation before rushing to judgment. The statement was poorly received, with even moderate voices pointing out that the body cam footage was the full investigation, that no amount of additional context could justify detaining someone for entering their own home. The Department of Justice, Derek's employer, released a carefully worded statement. "We are aware of the incident involving one of our attorneys. While we cannot comment on ongoing legal matters, we support Mr. Lawson's right to live free from unlawful detention and profiling." Within 2 weeks, Derek had filed a comprehensive civil rights lawsuit in federal court. The defendants were Officer Daniel Moore individually, the Midtown City Police Department, and the city itself. The complaint ran 47 pages and outlined multiple legal violations. Count 1 alleged unlawful detention under the Fourth Amendment. The complaint detailed how Moore had no reasonable suspicion to stop Derek, no articulable facts suggesting criminal activity, and no legal basis for demanding identification or preventing Derek from entering his home. Count 2 alleged racial profiling and discrimination under the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. The complaint argued that Moore's decision to stop Derek was motivated by racial bias, that a white person in identical circumstances would not have been stopped, and that the department's inadequate training on implicit bias enabled this discriminatory conduct. Count 3 alleged use of excessive force. While Moore hadn't used his weapon or injured Derek, the complaint argued that any physical force used during an unlawful detention is, by definition, excessive, and that grabbing and restraining someone without legal justification constitutes a violation of their constitutional rights. Count 4 alleged intentional infliction of emotional distress. The complaint described the humiliation of being treated as a criminal in front of neighbors and strangers, the trauma of being physically grabbed by a police officer, and the lasting psychological impact of the encounter. Count 5 alleged municipal liability, arguing that the city's failure to adequately train officers on implicit bias, its practice of clearing rookies for solo patrol after minimal field training despite documented concerns, and its systemic tolerance of racially motivated stops created the conditions that led to Derek's unlawful detention. The complaint sought $750,000 in damages, attorney's fees, and injunctive relief requiring policy reforms. The city's initial response was defensive. Their attorneys filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that Moore had acted in good faith, that his decision to investigate was within his discretion as a law enforcement officer, and that qualified immunity protected him from liability. Qualified immunity is a legal doctrine that shields government officials, including police officers, from civil lawsuits unless they violated clearly established constitutional rights. It's a controversial protection that critics argue allows officers to violate rights without consequences. But even qualified immunity has limits. It doesn't protect officers who violate rights that any reasonable officer would know are protected. The federal judge assigned to the case, Judge Patricia Henderson, was not sympathetic to the city's arguments. In a scathing order denying the motion to dismiss, she wrote, "The body cam footage in this case shows an officer detaining a citizen who was engaged in the entirely lawful activity of entering his own home. The officer had no reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. He had no legal basis for demanding identification. When the citizen asserted his rights, the officer escalated to physical force. These violations are so clear that any reasonable officer would know they crossed constitutional boundaries. Qualified immunity does not apply." The case moved forward. Discovery began. Depositions were scheduled. And as the city's attorneys reviewed the evidence, they realized they had no defense. The body cam footage was devastating. The civilian videos corroborated every aspect of Derek's account. Moore's own training records showed he'd been flagged for poor judgment. His field training officer had noted concerns about racial assumptions. The department's own policies stated that officers must have reasonable suspicion before detaining anyone. Every piece of evidence supported Derek's claims.
Officer Daniel Moore's employment with the Midtown City Police Department ended 14 weeks after the incident. The termination letter was direct and unsparing. Officer Moore's conduct on September 28th constituted gross misconduct and violated department policy, state law, and federal constitutional protections. He detained a citizen without reasonable suspicion. He escalated the encounter through unjustified physical force. He failed to recognize his error even when the citizen clearly identified himself as a resident. His actions brought significant negative attention to the department and demonstrated judgment failures that make him unfit for law enforcement duties. His employment is terminated effective immediately. Moore's name was entered into the National Decertification Index, a database tracking officers who have been fired or resigned under investigation for serious misconduct. The entry would prevent him from being hired by any other law enforcement agency in the country. His career in policing, which had lasted less than a year, was permanently over. Moore released a brief statement through his attorney. "I deeply regret my actions that day. I made serious errors in judgment that I will have to live with. I apologize to Mr. Lawson for the distress I caused." Derek's response was measured. Officer Moore is young. He made choices based on assumptions he didn't examine. But accountability isn't just about one officer. It's about a system that put him on the street with minimal training, ignored warning signs from his evaluators, and created the conditions where a rookie with documented judgment problems was patrolling alone and making decisions that violated people's rights. The reforms mandated by the settlement were comprehensive. The Midtown City Police Department implemented a new policy requiring all officers to complete 12 months of supervised field training before being cleared for solo patrol, an increase from the previous 12 weeks. The policy specifically noted that staffing shortages could not be used as justification for shortening training periods. The department created a mandatory implicit bias recognition program with quarterly refresher training and scenario-based exercises designed to help officers identify and challenge their assumptions. Officers who failed to demonstrate bias awareness would be required to repeat the training before being cleared for patrol duties. A new civilian oversight board was established with authority to review body camera footage from any incident involving allegations of racial profiling or unlawful detention. The board had the power to recommend disciplinary action and policy changes directly to the police chief and city council. The department also adopted a duty to intervene policy, requiring officers who witness unconstitutional conduct by their colleagues to immediately intervene and report the misconduct. Failure to intervene would be treated as seriously as committing the misconduct directly. Derek testified at a city council hearing 6 months after the settlement. He sat at a table facing the council members, community members filling the seats behind him, cameras recording for public broadcast. "What happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone," he began. "I have every advantage: education, professional credentials, knowledge of the law, resources to fight back, and I was still detained unlawfully, grabbed, threatened, and humiliated in front of my own home. Most people who experience this don't have my advantages. They can't afford attorneys. They don't know how to articulate constitutional violations. They don't have platforms to demand accountability." He leaned forward, his voice growing more intense. "The settlement I received is substantial, but money doesn't erase the humiliation of being treated like a criminal in your own neighborhood. It doesn't undo the violation of being grabbed by an officer who looked at me and saw a threat instead of a human being. It doesn't change the fact that after that day, I felt unsafe approaching my own front door." A council member asked what he hoped would change. Derek didn't hesitate. "First, training needs to be longer and better. 12 weeks isn't enough to prepare someone for the responsibility of carrying a badge and a gun. Officers need time to develop judgment, to learn when not to act, to understand that their assumptions can destroy lives. Second,
Accountability needs to be real. Officer Moore was fired, but how many others have done similar things and faced no consequences? How many black people have been stopped, detained, searched, or arrested without cause, only to have their complaints dismissed or ignored? Third, we need to fundamentally change how we think about policing. An officer saw me entering my home, and his first instinct was suspicion. That's not training failure. That's a cultural problem. Until we address the underlying biases that make black people seem inherently suspicious, no amount of policy reform will prevent these incidents. The council chamber was silent when he finished. Then someone in the audience began clapping. Others joined in. Within seconds, the room erupted in applause. One council member had tears in her eyes. The reforms implemented in Midtown City became a model studied by other departments. The settlement amount sent a clear financial message that unlawful detentions carry real costs. And Derek's visibility as a federal attorney gave the story staying power, keeping it in public consciousness longer than most incidents of police misconduct. But across the country, similar encounters continued to happen. Black people detained while entering their homes, their offices, their cars. Latino people stopped for looking suspicious in their own neighborhoods. Asian people questioned about where they're really from by officers who can't imagine they belong. The system that produced Officer Daniel Moore, the inadequate training, the rushed certification, the ignored warning signs, the cultural biases left unexamined, that system remains largely intact. Reform happens slowly, unevenly, incompletely. For every department that extends training and implements oversight, others continue business as usual.
3 years after the incident, Derek still lives at 437 Riverside Avenue. He still walks to his front door after work. He still inserts his key in the lock. But he also looks over his shoulder first. He notices police cars cruising the street. He tenses when officers are nearby. The encounter with Officer Moore changed him in ways the settlement couldn't address. He continues his work as a civil rights attorney, now with added personal perspective on the violations he investigates. He speaks at police training sessions, telling his story to rooms full of new officers, hoping that seeing a real person describe what it feels like to be profiled might break through their assumptions in ways policy manuals cannot. Officer Daniel Moore left law enforcement and, according to public records, now works in private security. His name comes up occasionally when journalists write about police accountability, as a cautionary example of how a single moment of biased judgment can end a career. Whether he learned from the experience, whether he examines his assumptions now, whether he understands the harm he caused, those questions remain unanswered. The building at 437 Riverside Avenue looks the same as it did that Thursday afternoon. Red brick exterior, black iron railings, heavy wooden door. People enter and leave without incident hundreds of times each day. But for one man, that doorway represents something larger than an entrance to his home. It represents the fight to be seen as legitimate in spaces you've earned the right to occupy. It represents the exhausting reality of having to prove you belong in your own life. The security camera footage from that day still exists, archived as evidence in the case file. It shows a calm afternoon, a man with keys, a door being unlocked. And then it shows something that shouldn't happen in a country that promises equal protection under the law. A badge being used not to serve and protect, but to question and control, based on nothing more than the color of skin. $750,000 was the settlement. Officer Moore's career was the consequence. But the real cost is measured in the loss of dignity, the erosion of trust, and the daily reality of knowing that even in front of your own home, you can be made to justify your existence. If you believe these stories matter, if you think proper training prevents these incidents, hit that subscribe button. We're exposing how departments prioritize filling shifts over preparing officers. We're demanding better.
Sir, stop right there for me.
What's going on, officer?
We got a call about suspicious behavior.
Suspicious? So why me?
You fit the description we were given. Until we sort it out, you have the right to remain silent.
I'm not resisting, but you're making a mistake.
The state chief's been calling me non-stop on the way over. Do you even know what y'all did? That man in the car? That's State Senator Malik J. Thomas. Get him out of cuffs. Now!
Officer Darren McCall had been with the Brookline City Police Department for just under a year. 12 months of half-completed training modules, 3 documented concerns about impulse control, and a reputation for stopping anyone who didn't fit his idea of belonging. His supervisors called him motivated, his fellow rookies called him reckless, but the department, short-staffed and overwhelmed, just called him available. On May 9th, 2024, that availability collided with a man walking toward a grocery store on a sunny afternoon. A man who wasn't acting suspicious, wasn't breaking any laws, wasn't even speaking, just existing in the wrong place in the wrong officer's imagination. A stop based on nothing more than bias turned into a detention, then an arrest, then a full-blown scandal the department desperately tried to contain. What McCall didn't know, not until it was far too late, was who that man actually was. A sitting state senator. And this one mistake would end his career and cost the city $3.5 million. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. Brookline City, a mid-size urban center in the Midwest with tree-lined streets, well-maintained public spaces, and a growing professional class. The Riverside shopping classes sat on the west side, a busy commercial hub with a grocery store, pharmacy, coffee shop, and ample parking. Thursday afternoon traffic was steady. Cars pulling in and out, shopping carts rattling across the pavement, people moving through their weekly routines without incident. At 2:47 p.m., Malik Thomas, 39 years old, pulled into the parking lot driving his modest sedan. He was dressed casually, dark jeans, a gray Henley shirt, sneakers. He just finished a constituent meeting and needed to pick up groceries before heading home. He parked in the third row, grabbed his reusable shopping bags from the back seat, and started walking toward the store entrance. Malik Thomas was a state senator, elected 3 years earlier representing District 14, which included parts of Brookline City and 2 surrounding suburbs. He'd built his career on education reform and criminal justice oversight. He served on the Senate Judiciary Committee. His face had been in local newspapers, on campaign mailers, at community town halls. He was a public figure in his district, though not universally recognizable across the state. Officer Darren McCall was parked at the edge of the lot, ostensibly monitoring traffic, but mostly scrolling through his patrol computer. At 26 years old, with 12 months on the force, McCall operated with a mindset shaped more by assumptions than experience. He'd been cleared for solo patrol after minimal field training, despite documented concerns about his judgment, his tendency to escalate, his pattern of stops that seemed to target black men disproportionately. McCall looked up from his computer and saw Malik Thomas walking across the parking lot. Nothing about Thomas's behavior suggested criminal activity. He wasn't running, wasn't looking around nervously, wasn't approaching cars or acting strangely, just walking toward a grocery store with shopping bags in hand. But McCall's pattern recognition system, built on unchecked bias rather than evidence-based policing, flagged Thomas as worth investigating. McCall exited his patrol car, his Axon Bodycam activating automatically. He walked quickly across the parking lot, closing the distance between them. "Sir, stop right there for me." Thomas turned, confusion crossing his face. "What's going on, officer?" "We got a call about suspicious behavior in this area." This was a lie. No call had come through dispatch, no report of criminal activity. McCall had simply decided that Thomas's presence warranted investigation. Thomas's expression shifted from confusion to frustration. Suspicious? So why me? McCall stepped closer, his eyes scanning Thomas from head to toe, looking for justification that didn't exist. "We fit the description we were given. Until we sort it out, you have the right to remain silent." The absurdity of the statement hung in the air. What description? Of what crime? Thomas shook his head, not aggressively, but with clear incredulity. "Look, whatever you think I'm doing, you're wrong. Sir, you're being detained. Thomas felt the familiar weight of being black in America, of having to prove innocence for the crime of existing. But he also knew his rights, knew police procedure, knew exactly what was happening. I'm not resisting, but you're making a mistake. McCall reached for his handcuffs. Other shoppers were starting to notice, slowing down, watching the encounter unfold. A woman pulled out her phone and began recording. McCall either didn't notice or didn't care. He grabbed Thomas's wrist and forced his hands behind his back, the handcuffs clicking into place with unnecessary force. Thomas's voice remained calm but carried an edge of warning. This is a mistake. You need to check who I am before this goes further.
6 minutes after the initial stop, a second patrol car pulled into the parking lot fast, tires squealing slightly. Sergeant Rita Hernandez emerged, moving quickly toward McCall's vehicle where Thomas sat handcuffed in the back seat. Her phone had been ringing nonstop for the past 4 minutes. The police chief, the department's public information officer, someone from the city manager's office, all asking the same question. Why was one of their officers arresting State Senator Malik Thomas in a grocery store parking lot? Hernandez approached McCall with barely controlled fury. Chief's been calling me nonstop on the way over. McCall's confidence faltered slightly. Suspicious male matched the description from, "Do you even know what you did?" Hernandez's voice cut through his excuse. "That man in your car, that's State Senator Malik J. Thomas." The color drained from McCall's face. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "What? Get him out of those cuffs, now!" McCall fumbled with his keys, hands shaking as he opened the patrol car door. Thomas stepped out, rubbing his wrists where the metal had pressed against skin. Hernandez approached immediately, her voice a mixture of professionalism and genuine regret. "Senator Thomas, I deeply apologize. This should not have happened." Thomas looked at McCall, then at Hernandez. His voice was quiet but carried the weight of controlled anger. "I told him, several times. He didn't listen. Sir, we'll be conducting a full investigation. This wasn't confusion, Sergeant. This was profiling. I was walking to a grocery store. That's what I was doing, and your officer decided that was suspicious enough to detain and handcuff me in front of dozens of witnesses." Hernandez had no defense, because there was no defense. She could see the phones recording, could imagine the social media posts already going live, could calculate the public relations disaster unfolding in real time. Thomas pulled out his phone and made a call. "David, I need you to meet me at home. I was just arrested in a grocery store parking lot by Brookline PD. Yes, arrested. For walking while black, apparently." The woman who'd been recording the entire encounter approached. "Senator Thomas, I got everything on video. I'm posting it now. People need to see this." Thomas nodded. "Thank you. Make sure it's clear I wasn't doing anything wrong. Just walking. That's all it takes, apparently. What would you have done if you were in this man's position and knew the officer had zero real reason to stop you?"
By 5 p.m., less than 90 minutes after the incident, the video had exploded across social media. The woman's TikTok post had 3 million views. Twitter was trending hashtag BrooklinePD and hashtag Senator Thomas. News outlets were calling the police department for comment. The footage was crystal clear. A man walking peacefully across a parking lot, an officer approaching without cause, the detention, the handcuffs, the supervising sergeant's panicked arrival. Comments flooded in. He was literally just walking, nothing suspicious at all. If they'll do this to a state senator, imagine what they do to regular people. Officer needs to be fired immediately. How many other people has this cop profiled? The Brookline Police Department's public information officer released a brief statement. "We are aware of an incident involving one of our officers and State Senator Thomas. The matter is under investigation. We take all complaints seriously." The statement satisfied no one. Local civil rights organizations issued immediate responses demanding transparency, accountability, and Officer McCall's termination. The state NAACP chapter called for a federal investigation into the department's practices. Other state legislators, both Democrat and Republican, issued statements supporting Senator Thomas. By that evening, Senator Thomas held a brief press availability outside his home. Cameras from 5 local news stations captured his statement. "This afternoon, I was walking toward a grocery store to buy food for my family. I was detained, handcuffed, and placed in a patrol car by Officer Darren McCall of the Brookline Police Department. When I asked what I'd done, he said I matched a description of suspicious activity.
There was no description. There was no suspicious activity. There was just a black man in a parking lot, and apparently that was enough. He paused, his voice steady but heavy. I wasn't targeted because I'm a senator. I was targeted because I'm a black man. That's what makes this matter. Not my position, but the pattern. Officer McCall didn't know who I was when he stopped me. He just knew what I looked like, and that was sufficient grounds for detention in his mind. Do you think the officer would have acted differently if he knew who the man was, or was this always going to happen?
By Friday morning, Captain James Rodriguez of Internal Affairs had assembled a complete file on Officer Darren McCall. The Bodycam footage was damning enough on its own, but the pattern that emerged from deeper investigation was even worse. Rodriguez pulled McCall's stop records from his 12 months on the force. The data was stark. 47 total stops for suspicious behavior. 38 of those stops involved black individuals, 81%. Brookline's population was 23% black. 0 arrests resulted from any of these stops. Multiple complaints filed by citizens who felt racially profiled. Not a single stop had resulted in discovery of criminal activity. Rodriguez cross-referenced the stops with dispatch records. In 31 cases, there had been no dispatch call justifying the stop. McCall had initiated contact based solely on his own observations. The pattern was unmistakable. He was targeting black residents without cause, fishing for criminal activity that didn't exist, creating confrontations that served no legitimate law enforcement purpose. The training records were equally troubling. McCall's academy file included multiple warnings. Officer McCall demonstrates difficulty distinguishing between unusual behavior and criminal behavior. Noted tendency to act on assumptions rather than observed facts. Concerns about implicit bias. Recommend additional training before field deployment. His field training reports showed similar patterns. McCall needs coaching on when not to initiate contact. Several instances of stops without articulable reasonable suspicion. Recommend extended field training period to address judgment concerns. But extended training hadn't happened. Additional bias recognition courses hadn't been completed. The documented concerns had been filed and forgotten because the department needed officers on the street, and McCall met the minimum qualifications on paper. Rodriguez interviewed the supervising sergeant who'd cleared McCall for solo patrol. The conversation was uncomfortable. Did you review the concerns in his training file before signing off? I skimmed them. Nothing seemed serious enough to delay him. Multiple warnings about bias and poor judgment didn't seem serious? We were short-staffed. He passed the basic requirements. I thought field experience would help him improve. Instead, he spent 12 months profiling residents, and now we have a state senator filing a federal civil rights lawsuit. The sergeant had no response. At what point should departments start removing officers who show obvious patterns, even without violent incidents?
Senator Thomas retained David Chen from the Midwest Civil Rights Legal Foundation. Chen filed a comprehensive federal lawsuit in U.S. District Court 8 days after the incident. The complaint was methodical and devastating. Count 1, Fourth Amendment violation, unlawful stop and detention. Officer McCall stopped Senator Thomas without reasonable suspicion of criminal activity, detained him without legal justification, and arrested him without probable cause. Count 2, 14th Amendment violation, racial profiling. The stop was motivated by racial bias, as evidenced by Officer McCall's pattern of disproportionately stopping black individuals and his inability to articulate any legitimate law enforcement purpose. Count 3, false arrest. Senator Thomas was unlawfully restrained and placed in custody despite engaging in entirely lawful conduct. Count 4, emotional distress. The humiliation of being handcuffed in public, treated as a criminal while engaging in routine activity, and subjected to racial profiling caused significant emotional harm. Count 5, municipal liability. The city of Brookline failed to adequately train its officers, ignored documented concerns about Officer McCall's judgment and bias, and maintained policies that enabled discriminatory policing. The lawsuit sought $3.5 million in damages, termination of Officer McCall, and comprehensive policy reforms. The city's legal team reviewed the evidence and quickly advised settlement. The body cam footage was indefensible. McCall's stop pattern proved systemic targeting. The training records showed the department had ignored clear warning signs. Fighting the case would only generate more negative publicity and potentially result in a larger verdict. The city manager reached out to Senator Thomas's attorney within 3 weeks. Settlement negotiations began immediately. 8 months after the parking lot incident, the settlement was finalized. The terms were made public per Senator Thomas's insistence. $3.5 million settlement paid directly to Senator Thomas, with a portion donated to civil rights organizations working on police reform. Officer Darren McCall terminated, effective immediately, with cause listed as gross misconduct, pattern of discriminatory stops, and civil rights violations. Post-certification review. McCall's law enforcement certification was revoked by the State Peace Officers Standards and Training Board. State Misconduct Registry. McCall's name, photograph, and termination details were entered into the state's public database of officers terminated for cause. Public acknowledgement. The city issued a formal apology acknowledging that Senator Thomas was unlawfully detained and that Officer McCall's conduct violated constitutional rights.
Comprehensive policy reforms. All officers required to complete 16 weeks of field training with no exceptions. Quarterly bias recognition training with scenario-based testing. Early warning system tracking stop patterns and racial disparities. Civilian Oversight Board with authority to review stops and recommend discipline. Public disclosure of stop data by race and outcome. Officer McCall issued a brief statement through his attorney. I never intended harm. I made mistakes in judgment that I deeply regret. Senator Thomas responded at a press conference. Intent doesn't erase impact. Officer McCall may not have intended to profile me, but that's exactly what happened. And it happened because the system that trained him, supervised him, and cleared him for duty failed to address obvious problems. This settlement isn't just about me. It's about every person who gets stopped, questioned, detained, and humiliated for existing while black. Do you think monetary settlements actually change police behavior, or are deeper reforms needed? 18 months after the incident, Senator Thomas was re-elected with 67% of the vote. He'd used the experience as a platform for criminal justice reform, introducing legislation requiring statewide tracking of police stops by race, mandating bias training for all officers, and creating a database of terminated officers to prevent problematic officers from simply moving to different departments. Officer Darren McCall left law enforcement at age 27. The misconduct registry made it impossible to get hired by another department. He found work in private security, but was terminated within 6 months after his background became known to the company's clients. The parking lot stop, captured on multiple cameras and viewed millions of times, followed him everywhere. The Brookline Police Department implemented all required reforms. Stop data from the following year showed a 39% reduction in stops without clear reasonable suspicion, and a significant reduction in racial disparities. The early warning system identified 3 other officers with concerning stop patterns, leading to additional training and closer supervision. But the most lasting impact was the conversation the incident sparked. Senator Thomas's case became a reference point in discussions about racial profiling, implicit bias, and the need for accountability in policing. The body cam footage was used in police training sessions across the country as an example of how not to conduct a stop. 2 years later, Senator Thomas still shops at that same grocery store.
He parks in the same lot, walks the same path to the entrance. But he's always aware now, always watching for patrol cars, always carrying the memory of being handcuffed for walking while black. The settlement brought accountability. The reforms brought change. But nothing can restore the fundamental sense of safety that was violated that Thursday afternoon when an officer decided that his presence in a parking lot was suspicious enough to justify detention. If you believe these stories matter, if you think officers who profile should lose their badges, hit that subscribe button. We're exposing how bias operates in routine encounters and demanding accountability for officers who target people based on appearance rather than evidence. We're fighting for a system where walking to a grocery store doesn't require proving you're not a criminal. This isn't about one officer or one senator. It's about every person who's been stopped without cause and forced to defend their right to exist in public spaces.